The divorce papers were still warm from the printer when Marcus slid them across our kitchen table like he was passing me a restaurant check. I remember the sound of the ceramic coffee mug hitting the granite countertop. I remember the way the morning light came through the window above the sink, the window I had picked out myself, the one with the little frosted border I'd fallen in love with when we first toured this house 7 years ago. I remember thinking, in that split second before my brain caught up to what my eyes were reading, that it was a beautiful Saturday morning. I remember thinking I was going to make pancakes. And then I read the words at the top of that document: Petition for Dissolution of Marriage. And underneath that, in cold, clean legal font, Marcus Jerome Williams, petitioner, versus Nadine Elaine Williams, respondent. Respondent. After 14 years of marriage, I had been reduced to a legal term. A word that meant I was the one being acted upon. The one something was being done to. I looked up at my husband, the man I had loved since I was 22 years old, the man I had followed to 3 different cities for his career, the man whose mother I had nursed through breast cancer, whose student loans I had helped pay off while putting my own graduate school dreams on hold, and I searched his face for something. Regret. Guilt. Even just the basic human decency of looking uncomfortable. There was nothing. He had his hands folded on the table like a man in a business meeting. His jaw was set. His eyes were clear. "Nadine," he said, and his voice was so calm it felt like a physical insult. "I think deep down you knew this wasn't working." I did not know that. I want you to understand, I genuinely, completely, with my whole heart did not know that. But that wasn't even the part that broke me, because I hadn't gotten to the bottom of the page yet. I hadn't seen the section where, under his attorney's contact information, there was a second name listed. Brianna Michelle Carter, my best friend of 11 years, my maid of honor, the woman who had held my hand in the hospital when I had my miscarriage, the woman who was still labeled in my phone as Bri my person. I looked up from that paper and said, very quietly, "Is she the reason?" He didn't answer with words. He just held my gaze for a moment, then looked down at the table, and that silence, that absolute, cowardly, devastating silence, told me everything that 14 years of marriage had apparently failed to. I want you to stay with me because this story is not just about betrayal. It is about what happens when you survive the unsurvivable. It is about what happens when God, the universe, fate, whatever you believe in, decides that justice is not optional. It is about what happens when a woman who has been humiliated at the very bottom looks up and realizes she is standing at the base of a mountain she never knew existed. But first, you have to feel the bottom with me. Because the ending doesn't mean anything if you don't understand where I started. I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, in a neighborhood where ambition was both celebrated and quietly punished, depending on who was watching. My mother, Doris, was a practical woman, a home health aide who worked 12-hour shifts and still managed to have dinner on the table and church clothes ironed by Sunday morning. She was not a woman who spoke much about dreams, but she lived by a code she passed to me without ever naming it. Carry yourself with dignity and never let anyone see you desperate. My father left when I was 9. Not dramatically, no screaming fight, no slamming door. He just evaporated. There one Sunday, gone by Tuesday. My mother never spoke badly about him in front of me, which I now understand was an enormous act of discipline. At the time, it just meant I had a lot of unanswered questions about what I had done wrong. I carried that question for a long time, longer than I should have. I met Marcus Williams in the fall semester of my junior year at Howard University. He was a business major with a slow smile and a confidence that I, at 21, mistook for security. He was handsome in a way that made other women notice, which I mistook for a compliment to me. He remembered things, the name of my mother's cat, how I took my coffee, the professor I couldn't stand, and I mistook that attentiveness for love. We dated 3 years before he proposed. I said yes on a Tuesday night in my apartment kitchen, with no ring yet because he was saving up, and I thought that was romantic. I thought a lot of things at 24 that I would spend the next decade slowly, painfully unlearning. I met Brianna the same year I met Marcus. She was a communications major, funny and fearless in the way that some people are when they have been pretty their whole lives, and the world has mostly rewarded them for it. We were in the same study group for an elective sociology course, and she made me laugh so hard one afternoon that the professor asked us to leave, and somehow that became the foundation of a friendship I thought would outlast everything. She was at our wedding. She caught the bouquet. She gave a toast that made half the room cry. I trusted her with things I didn't trust anyone else with. The miscarriage. The season of my marriage when Marcus and I stopped touching each other and I didn't know why. The job I turned down in New York because Marcus didn't want to relocate. She knew all of it, every tender, vulnerable piece of it. I understand now what it means to hand someone a map of all your soft places and not consider that they might use it against you. Over the years, without either of us saying it out loud, his career became the priority and mine became the supplement. His schedule drove our decisions. His comfort shaped our home. His needs organized our weekends. And I told myself this was partnership. I told myself this was what love looked like when it was grown up and practical and real. What I did not tell myself, what I absolutely refused to acknowledge, even when the signs were right in front of me, was that I had been slowly disappearing inside my own marriage for years. Looking back now, with the clarity that only distance and devastation can provide, I can identify at least a dozen moments I should have paid closer attention to. Moments my gut flagged and my brain immediately rationalized. There was the conference in Charlotte 3 years before the divorce, when Marcus came home 2 days early but didn't call to surprise me. I found out because I checked our shared bank account and saw he'd gassed up the car in Georgia when he was supposed to still be in North Carolina. He said he'd left early because the last sessions were pointless. I accepted that. I wrote it in the mental ledger I was keeping called things that felt wrong but probably aren't. There was the birthday dinner for Brianna, about 18 months before the divorce, when I showed up late and found them laughing together at a corner table in a way that made something small and cold move through my chest. I smiled and sat down and ordered wine and told myself I was being ridiculous and insecure, which was a story Marcus had told me about myself often enough that I'd started to believe it. There was the weekend Marcus told me he was going fishing with his college friend Dion, and I called Dion's wife to see if she wanted brunch, and she was confused because Dion had been home all weekend. When I told Marcus, he looked at me with that patient, slightly irritated expression, as though I were a child who had misunderstood something simple, and said Dion had canceled last minute and he'd gone with a client instead. I accepted that too. I accepted so many things. The last year of my marriage, Marcus became distant in a way that felt different from all the previous distances. Colder, more deliberate. He started keeping his phone face down on every surface. He started responding to my affection with the particular tolerant patience of a man who has already made a decision but hasn't told you yet. I asked him once, directly, sitting on the edge of our bed on a quiet Wednesday night, if there was someone else. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "Nadine, why do you always do this? Why do you always look for a reason to be unhappy?" And God help me, I apologized. I apologized for asking. The divorce papers appeared on a Saturday in March. But the real confrontation happened 3 days later when Brianna came to my house. She called first. Her voice had a quality I hadn't heard from her before, rehearsed. The careful calm of someone who has practiced what they're going to say enough times that the emotion has been mostly sanded away. I let her in. I made tea, because that is what I do when I'm nervous, busy my hands, give myself something practical to focus on. She sat at my kitchen table and she folded her hands and she looked at me and she said, "Nadine, I love him." I had known, on some level, this was coming. But knowing something in the abstract and having it spoken aloud in your kitchen by someone you love are two completely different experiences. I felt the words land in my body like something physical. I said, "How long?" 2 years, she said. 2 years. 24 months. She had sat across from me at dinners and birthday celebrations for 2 years. She had texted me, "Good morning, Queen, and you are so strong," for 2 years while sleeping with my husband. She had held my hand at my cousin's funeral 8 months ago. She had been in my home at Christmas. "Does he love you?" I asked. "He says he does," she said. And then, and this is the part I will never fully forgive, not because of the words themselves, but because of how she said them with quiet, almost apologetic certainty, "I think we're going to be good together, Nadine. I really do." I asked her to leave. My voice was very steady. I'm still not entirely sure how. At the door she turned and said, "I'm sorry, I know this doesn't fix anything. But I want you to know I genuinely am sorry." I closed the door. I leaned my back against it. I slid down to the floor and sat there on the cold hardwood of my own entryway, in the house I had picked out, in the life I had built, and I made a sound I have never made before or since, not quite crying, not quite screaming, something in between, something animal and private and completely uncontrolled. I want to pause and speak directly to every person watching right now who has ever sat on a floor at the lowest point of their life. To everyone who has ever had their entire understanding of their own life turn out to be something else entirely. To every Black woman who has ever given everything she had to people who took it and offered nothing in return. I see you. This story is for you. Stay with me. If you're new here, please subscribe right now and hit that notification bell. We tell stories here that don't get told enough. Drop your name and your city in the comments below. I want to know exactly where in this world you're watching from, because what we're building here is a community, and communities need to know each other. Now, let me tell you what happened next. The divorce proceedings were civil in the technical sense. We had no children. We had a house, 2 cars, joint savings, and 14 years of a shared life to untangle. Marcus had retained a very expensive attorney. I had retained the best I could afford. What I did not know, what nobody told me until it was too late, was that 3 years prior, I had signed a postnuptial agreement. Marcus had presented it as a financial planning document, told me it was something his firm's lawyer had recommended for tax purposes, explained it in a way that made perfect sense on that particular afternoon, and I had signed it because I trusted him. That document effectively limited my claim to the marital assets to a fixed sum, considerably less than my actual contribution over 14 years, and considerably less than what Georgia divorce law would have provided without it. I walked out of my attorney's office into the Atlanta afternoon and stood on the sidewalk, and I breathed through my nose and held myself together until I got to my car. Then I set a timer for 10 minutes. 10 minutes to fall apart completely. When it went off, I wiped my face, checked my mascara in the rearview mirror, and drove home. The settlement left me with enough for a security deposit and first month's rent on a 1-bedroom apartment. I had my salary, my car, the older one, my clothes and books, and a few pieces of furniture we divided without ceremony on a damp Saturday morning while carefully avoiding looking at each other. The house sold in 3 weeks. Watching the listing photos appear online with someone else's furniture staged inside the rooms where I had lived my life was a specific kind of quiet cruelty I don't have exact words for. Marcus and Brianna were spotted together publicly about 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized. Someone texted me a screenshot from Instagram. They were at a rooftop restaurant downtown. She was wearing a yellow dress. He had his hand on the small of her back. They were laughing. I put my phone face down on the counter of my new, small, very quiet apartment, and I stood there for a long time. My mother drove down from Baltimore in June. She showed up with a cooler full of food she'd cooked, the kind of cooking that is also a language, that says things about love and fury and determination that words cannot carry. She didn't ask many questions. She helped me unpack the boxes I hadn't been able to face. She fixed the loose shower head. She sat with me on the small balcony in the evenings and talked about everything except what had happened, and somehow that was more healing than a direct conversation would have been. Before she left, she hugged me at my door for a long time, and she said very quietly against my hair, "You come from women who survived worse." And every single one of them kept going. "You hear me? Every single one." I heard her. The 18 months that followed the divorce were not a movie montage. They were not a clean, uplifting sequence of early morning runs and gradually brightening color palettes. They were slow and irregular and frequently exhausting, with weeks that felt like actual backward movement. I kept working. The nonprofit I worked for, a housing advocacy organization called Cornerstone Community Partners, became my primary source of structure and purpose. The work was real. The need was real. I could look at it on the days when everything else felt like it was crumbling and know that something I was doing mattered. Keisha turned out to be a genuine friend, someone I hadn't been particularly close to before, but who proved herself consistently after. A colleague named Vanessa became someone I could have dinner with and actually be honest during. My cousin Lydia called more often. The people Marcus and I had known as a couple largely drifted away, which I had been told to expect and still found painful. For the first time since my early 20s, I started thinking seriously about what I wanted. Not what supported Marcus's trajectory, not what made our life work, what Nadine Williams actually wanted for herself, for her future. It was a disorienting question. I had spent so long organizing my desires around someone else's needs that my own felt foreign. Like a language I had once been fluent in and had let atrophy. I applied to a part-time graduate program in nonprofit management at Georgia State. I got in. I told my mother and she cried, and I cried, and then we both pulled ourselves together and talked practically about tuition payment plans. It was not glamorous, but it was mine. And at that point in my life, mine was everything. It was a Tuesday in February, exactly 23 months after Marcus had slid those divorce papers across the kitchen table, when my life changed again. But this time in a direction I could not have imagined. I came home from a long day, a difficult grant meeting, a graduate class that ran over, a commute extended by rain and Atlanta traffic. I was tired in the way that lives in your spirit, not just your body. I changed clothes, poured water, and went to sort through the mail that had been accumulating. There were the usual things: a bill, a donation solicitation, a credit card offer. And then, at the bottom of the stack, a formal white envelope with a return address I didn't recognize, a law firm in Birmingham, Alabama. Clayton, Weston and Associates. Something made me open it immediately. The letter informed me that I had been identified as the sole beneficiary in the estate of one Evelyn Ruth Patterson, who had passed away on January 28th, and that the estate wished to notify me of my inheritance and request my presence at the firm's offices at my earliest convenience. I read the letter 3 times. I did not know anyone named Evelyn Ruth Patterson. I called the number the next morning. I spoke with an attorney named Christopher Weston who confirmed, yes, I was the Nadine Elaine Williams listed in the documents, and yes, this pertained to a significant inheritance, and he strongly recommended I come to Birmingham as soon as possible. "Can you give me any sense of what we're talking about?" I asked. There was a pause. The kind of pause that suggests the person is choosing their words very carefully. "Ms. Williams," he said, "I think it would be better to discuss the specifics in person. But I will tell you that this is a substantial matter. I would encourage you to arrange to come as soon as you can." I took a personal day the following Friday and drove to Birmingham alone. Picture the woman who walked into that law office. She is wearing her best blazer, the navy one bought on sale the previous spring, over a clean blouse and dark slacks. Her hair is neat. Her expression is composed in the way that Black women in professional spaces often learn younger than they should have to. She is alone. She does not know why she has been summoned. She sits down when invited, accepts a glass of water, puts her hands in her lap, and then Christopher Weston opens a folder and begins to talk. Evelyn Ruth Patterson, born 1941, had been a woman of considerable but private means. She had spent the last 30 years of her life in Birmingham, where she was known in philanthropic and civic circles, but had largely retreated from public life following the death of her husband, Charles Patterson, a real estate developer, in 1994. Charles had built, over the course of his career, a real estate portfolio spanning 7 states, commercial properties, mixed-use developments, and historically significant buildings he and Evelyn had worked together to preserve and restore. It was the kind of wealth that is generational not because it is passed down, but because it accumulates, because real estate, properly managed, appreciates and compounds in ways money in accounts cannot. Charles died without a will. His estate spent years in legal resolution, during which Evelyn worked with lawyers and courts to establish her inheritance rights and eventually took control of the full portfolio herself. She then proceeded to manage it with discipline and intelligence that quietly stunned everyone around her. By the time Evelyn Patterson passed away at 82, the portfolio, valued at roughly $100 million when Charles died, had grown. Significantly, real estate in her cities had appreciated dramatically over 30 years of careful stewardship. The portfolio, as of the date of her death, was assessed by 3 independent appraisers at a combined value of approximately $300 billion. When Christopher Weston said that number quietly, precisely, as though discussing something ordinary, I experienced several seconds of something that can only be described as cognitive silence. My brain simply stopped processing. "I'm sorry," I said. "Can you say that again?" He said it again. He was patient. He had clearly expected this would require repetition. $300 billion in real estate assets, with a management team already in place, and a trust framework designed to maintain and grow the estate rather than liquidate it, named as the sole inheriting beneficiary, me. "I don't understand," I told him. "I didn't know her. I don't know how this is possible." Christopher Weston leaned back and said, "Mrs. Patterson was very deliberate about her choices. She has left documentation explaining her reasoning." He removed a handwritten letter, 3 pages in careful, distinctive cursive, and placed it before me. "I think she explains it better than I can." The letter was dated about 14 months before her death, written while I was still in the middle of my particular version of falling and trying to stand back up. It began with a sentence I have committed to memory and will carry for the rest of my life. She wrote, "I have spent 80 years watching what the world does with women who have everything to give and no one to protect them, and I have decided that my final act will be to correct one small instance of that injustice." Evelyn Patterson, I learned in the pages that followed, had experienced her own version of betrayal. Her husband had not been a faithful man. She was clear-eyed about this, neither bitter nor excusing. After Charles died, the years of managing the estate and reclaiming her own competence had become, she wrote, the most alive I have ever felt in my adult life. She had decided that her estate would not go to people who were already protected. She had enough experience with wealth to know it tended to compound, not just financially, but socially. People who had wealth acquired more. People who were already insulated became more so. She wanted to do something different. She had identified a specific set of criteria. She was looking for a Black woman. She was explicit about this and explained why without defensiveness. She had observed across her long life that Black women were among the most systematically undervalued members of American society, consistently giving more than they received across every domain, and she wanted to make a correction that was pointed and intentional. She wanted someone who had demonstrated resilience without hardening. Someone who had experienced genuine loss without losing her orientation toward other people. Someone who was, she wrote, still kind when the world had given her reasons not to be. She had been watching my work, the grant writing, the community advocacy, the graduate school application, through her research team for over a year before making her final decision. She had reviewed the public records of my divorce. She had read an essay I published in a nonprofit sector journal about equitable housing access. She had apparently even had someone attend a community event I organized to observe how I treated people when no one of consequence was watching. She wrote, "What I am leaving you is not a gift in the ordinary sense. It is a responsibility. It is a wager on the kind of woman I believe you to be. The world took something from you that it had no right to take. I am returning with interest something far larger. What you do with it will tell the story of whether I was right about you. I believe I was, but the proving is yours to do. I read the letter twice in that law office, sitting very still. Then I folded it carefully, held it between my hands, and looked out the window at the parking garage across the street. I did not cry, because I was too far past the point where crying was adequate. What I felt in that moment was something I had never felt before. It took me a long time to name it. I felt seen, not pitied, not rescued in a way that diminished me. Seen, accurately, completely, by someone who had never met me but who had paid enough attention to understand things about me that many people who had known me for years had failed to notice. Evelyn Patterson had looked at my life and seen not the failure of it but the substance of it, not the marriage that had ended but the woman who had kept getting up. The legal process of formally assuming the estate took several months. I hired my own attorney, a very good one this time, and a financial advisor, and I asked questions constantly because I was not going to sign my name to anything I did not understand. I did not tell many people initially. My mother, my therapist, Keisha, because she had been present for the worst of it and deserved to know something good was happening. That was the complete list for the first 2 months. Word got out, because word always gets out. Atlanta's Black professional community is connected in ways that are both beautiful and sometimes uncomfortable, and the news moved through those networks with a thoroughness I had not anticipated. By the time it was being discussed at parties I was not attending, the essential fact was accurate. Nadine Williams, who had been divorced and humiliated and left with a 1-bedroom apartment, was now the steward of one of the largest privately held real estate portfolios in the country. People I hadn't spoken to in years reappeared. People who had quietly drifted toward Marcus during the divorce came back with warm energy that I received politely and filed accurately. And Marcus called me. I will not reproduce that conversation in full because some things should remain private not out of protection for him, but because I need to be the kind of person who does not perform other people's diminishment for an audience. What I will tell you is that his call had the particular quality of a man who has made a calculation and found himself on the wrong side of it, now attempting to renegotiate from a position he no longer occupies. He was careful. He asked how I was doing. Said he was glad I had landed well. Said he had always known I was special. I listened with a stillness that I think surprised him, because Nadine of 14 years ago would have had feelings about all of it, right there in the moment, available for him to manage. Current Nadine listened, and at the end I said, "I appreciate you calling, Marcus. I hope you and Brianna are well." I meant it. Not because I was performing graciousness, but because I had genuinely arrived at a place where their happiness or unhappiness was simply not my business anymore. The part of my life where their choices shaped my days was over. And the relief of that, the sheer, expansive relief, was, in its own quiet way, a form of victory that money cannot buy. Brianna did not call. I did not expect her to. There is a particular kind of lesson that can only be learned through loss. Not because pain is instructive in some necessary cosmic sense, I resist the narrative that everything bad that happens to us is secretly a gift. Some things are simply unjust. They are wrong. They cause real damage and leave real marks. But within the unjust thing, within the damage, there are sometimes capacities that grow that would not have grown otherwise. Not because the injustice produced them, they were already in you, but because the pressure of surviving it activated them. I know who I am now in a way I did not know before. I know I am capable of holding myself together when everything falls apart, and that this is not a small thing. I know I have an orientation toward other people that is genuine and durable. That 14 years of gradually disappearing inside a marriage, and then losing it entirely, could not extinguish it. I know that I make better decisions when I trust my own instincts rather than overriding them with other people's explanations. I have a detailed inventory of every time I chose someone else's version of reality over my own direct perception, and I have resolved, with complete conviction, never to do that again. I know that Black women are not required to earn dignity through suffering. We are not required to demonstrate worthiness through endurance. We come from women who endured far more than any of us should have had to, and the fact of that endurance is not a mandate for us to keep choosing the painful path. We are allowed to receive. We are allowed to be seen. We are allowed to have things, not because we have been through enough, but simply because we are here and we are human, and we deserve the full dimension of a life. I know that Evelyn Patterson saw that in me before I fully saw it in myself, and I carry the responsibility of that seeing every single day. Within 8 months of formally assuming the estate, I established the Patterson-Williams Foundation, named for both Evelyn and myself, because I wanted her legacy to be visible and permanent. The foundation's initial focus was affordable housing development in 6 southern cities, with a particular emphasis on preserving historically Black neighborhoods facing displacement pressure from gentrification. I left my position at Cornerstone Community Partners with enormous gratitude and a donation I hoped would sustain their work for years. I finished my master's degree because I had started it and I believe in finishing things, and because it gave me something no inheritance could, knowledge I had earned myself, on my own terms. My mother was in the fourth row at graduation and cried from the moment I walked out to the moment I walked back. I moved out of the one-bedroom apartment into a home that was appropriate for the life I was building, in a neighborhood I had always loved, filled with things that were genuinely mine, books and art and plants, and a kitchen designed for someone who actually cooks. I went to Ghana. Finally, after all those years of folded away wanting, I went. 3 weeks. I came back changed in ways I'm still unpacking. I am dating someone. Carefully, slowly, with the full knowledge of what I bring to a relationship now and what I will no longer accept in one. It is early. I am not in a hurry. I have learned that the right pace for something real is the pace that the thing actually requires. 2 years after walking into that Birmingham law office, the Patterson-Williams Foundation has funded the development or preservation of over 2,000 units of affordable housing. We have partnered with 47 community organizations. We have launched a fellowship program for emerging Black women leaders in housing policy and urban planning, providing both funding and mentorship. We have broken ground on 3 mixed-use developments designed in partnership with local residents, built to serve the people who already live in those communities rather than the people who might move in once the neighborhood has been made desirable by their displacement. The work is not finished. The work will not be finished in my lifetime. But it is real, and it is growing, and it is aligned with the values of the woman who funded it and the woman who is stewarding. I want to speak to you directly right now. Not through the story, but directly, as plainly as I know how. If you are watching this, and you are in the middle of your own version of the bottom, if you are sitting in a quiet apartment that feels like the ruins of something, trying to figure out how to get through the next week, if you have been betrayed by someone you loved, and you are not sure yet what that means for who you are, I want you to hear this. Your value is not determined by whether someone chose you. Your worth is not calculated by what your marriage produced or what your partner decided about you. The people who left were not oracles. Their departure was not a verdict. I was not less valuable when Marcus decided he wanted someone else. I was not diminished by the post-nuptial agreement I signed in good faith or by the settlement that undervalued 14 years of my life or by the social displacement that followed. All of those things happened to my circumstances. None of them happened to my actual self. The self is more durable than the circumstances. I believe this with everything I have, not because it is comforting, but because I have lived it. Evelyn Patterson spent 4 years looking for someone to leave her life's work to. She wasn't looking for someone who had never been knocked down. She was looking for someone who had been knocked down and had developed, in the process of getting back up, the qualities that survive difficulty with their integrity intact. She was looking for evidence of character under pressure. She found it in the record of a woman who had lost what felt like everything and had kept getting up. Not heroically, not without breaking, not without sitting on the bathroom floor in the cold water for longer than was probably necessary, but getting up nonetheless. Your story is not over when something ends. The chapters that feel like conclusions are sometimes just the end of the opening act. I did not know, on that Saturday morning when Marcus slid the divorce papers across our kitchen table, that I was standing at the beginning of the most important season of my life. I did not know, when Brianna said I love him, that the loss I was experiencing was making space for something I had no framework yet to imagine. I did not know, when I cried on the bathroom floor and moved into that one-bedroom apartment and started over at 38, that all of it was a path. It was a path. It turns out it was a path. I am grateful for my mother, who gave me the language of survival before I ever needed it, who drove from Baltimore with a cooler full of love when the worst had already happened, who said you come from women who survived worse in a voice that made it feel like prophecy. I am grateful for the small circle of people who remained when everything was reconfiguring, who proved through consistent small acts that trust is not extinct, that there are people who will show up and stay. I am grateful for my therapist, who helped me understand that healing is not linear and not shameful and not something you complete and move past, but something you practice as a lifelong discipline. I still go. I want to say that plainly and without apology, because there is too much silence around mental health in our communities, and that silence costs us. And I am grateful, with a depth I cannot fully express, for Evelyn Ruth Patterson, whom I never met and who saw me anyway, who spent her final years making a deliberate decision about what her life would leave behind and chose, with full information and clear eyes, to leave it to me. I will spend the rest of my life trying to see people the way she saw me. Trying to direct resources, money, yes, but also attention, advocacy, opportunity, simple human recognition, toward the people the world has overlooked. If I do that, if I spend the years I have left doing that work with consistency and integrity, then the story of Nadine Williams will not be a story about betrayal and inheritance. It will be a story about how one woman's act of clear-eyed generosity created a ripple that kept going long after both of them were gone. That is the story I want to tell with my life. That is the story Evelyn Patterson trusted me to tell. I intend to honor that trust for every day I have left to do it. The woman who sat on that bathroom floor did not know she was preparing for this. She just knew she had to keep breathing. Sometimes that is enough. Sometimes that is everything. Whatever chapter you are in right now, you are still in the story. Don't you dare put the book down. Before this video ends, I need to hear from you right now in the comments. Tell me your name and the city you're watching from. Tell me which part of Nadine's story hit you the hardest. Tell me if you've ever had a moment that felt like the absolute end that turned out to be something else entirely. Every single comment matters here. If this story moved you, please subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell. We release stories like this every week. Stories that don't get told in enough places, about resilience and justice and the strength that grows in the dark. And if you know someone, a sister, a friend, a coworker, anyone, who is in the middle of their own version of the bottom right now, share this video with them tonight. Not because it will fix anything, but because sometimes what we need most in the hardest moments is simply to know that someone else made it through. Next week, we're bringing you a story about a woman who was told for 20 years that she was the problem in every room she entered, who discovered she was actually the only person in those rooms telling the truth. It is one you will not be able to stop thinking about. Make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss it. Nadine Williams is still building, still learning, still, on certain quiet mornings, a little surprised to find herself exactly where she is. She is also, for the first time in a very long time, exactly where she belongs. And so are you. Subscribe, comment your name, plus city share with someone who needs this.